in a remote cabin in the high Sierras.
That rabbit stew smells delicious, Snake Eyes. I just wish I hadn't seen you sneak behind them and break their necks. We have a visitor. Aw, it's one of Timber's progeny, bearing a gift or maintaining a pact created years ago. Take 'em, Snake Eyes.
Scarlett, I want to tell you.
Shh, not now.
Doesn't seem to matter what I say. I'm always turned away. No one knows how hard I tried. Oh, I have these words that I need to say, driving me insane. All my life been so silent, but I'll vocalize tonight, 'cause I'm just Snake Eyes and I've been born again. Is it my destiny to live a life of mute ninja agility? I'm quite zen, but when I want to talk, it ends. What will it take for her to see the man behind the clone and speak with me? Hey, it's me, Mark, and thank you to Snake Eyes for that lovely little introduction to the episode. My love language is G.I. Joe, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe Comics podcast. If you are new to the show, you can find out all of the details over at the website, talkingjoe.co.uk is that website. Today, we will be looking at G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, issue 303, released 17th of January 2024, which was just this week gone as at the time of recording. And today we will be joined by some special guests, the hosts of the Comicbook Couples Counseling podcast. But before we bring those on, joining me as always, his love language is nitpicking. It's A Real American Tim. How are you, Tim?
Hello, Mark. I'm well, and hello, listeners. I have no pun response for that intro.
Okay.
My love language might be providing community for my friends.
Mm.
Let's say hello to our guests.
So our special guests are, well, one of them makes up approximately 50% of the Comic Book Couples Counseling podcast, and the other one makes up the remaining 50% of the Comic Book Couples Counseling podcast. It is Brad and Lisa Gullickson.
Hello!
Welcome.
Hello. What accurate math? There's no 200% of comic book couples counseling here. There's exactly 100% and no more.
See, I said approximately because I guess you might, in your own minds, have different definitions. But let's not get into that. Let's not create.
No.
Let's not create a whole.
I didn't know we had to be lying down for this conversation about G.I. Joe.
So yeah, the reason that I sort of brought you on was on the back of being a listener and fan of your podcast, but then all of your coverage of the Skybound relaunch made me think that you'd be great to bring on and bring on very different takes on G.I. Joe as well, because you've been getting into the weeds with the Energon universe coverage. You've been looking at the books, you've been talking to the creators and so on, but your mileage in terms of G.I. Joe as a whole does vary. So Brad and Lisa, why don't you tell us about your G.I. Joe origins stories? Where does it stretch back to for you guys?
So, Lisa, I think I'll start I am older.
Yeah, that seems fair. Fair.
Okay.
You go ahead.
All right. So I'm an 80s, 90s kid. I was trying to figure out exactly when I started collecting G.I. Joe action figures, and I just this very day went and looked at all the early waves of the 3-inch 3/4 line, and I've determined that 1984 was the year I first got the toys, because I remember that line fairly well. So if it wasn't 84, then it was 85, and I somehow still got the 84 line. That's I think approximately where I began my obsession with G.I. Joe. And it was an obsession. I loved the cartoons. I loved the toys. I loved the G.I. Joe animated movie when it came out. And in 1990, we moved from San Diego, California to Burke, Virginia, and I hated it. I hated Virginia at the time. I hated moving. I hated my school. I had no friends. But my dad took me to Joe Gumbinger's Burke Used Books and Comics, and I saw my first G.I. Joe comic book, and it was issue 103 with Storm Shadow crashing through the ceiling, sword raised. And that was my first comic book. And so I owe my obsession with comics to my obsession with G.I. Joe.
Wow.
And my story with G.I. Joe is like way shorter because I am a slightly younger 80s, 90s kid. And weirdly, G.I. Joe never came up. I have an older brother. He was into juggling and klutz books. Do you remember those from the 80s? Where like it's just like you buy the book and they teach you how to juggle. That's what he was into. So
or how to use a yo-yo.
Yeah. And they had yo-yo. They had all kinds of fun books that my brother was super into. So we were not an action figure house. And
you were a pretty conservative house. Like
yeah.
you know, toy guns wasn't really like your thing. Although your dad was a hunter.
We were allowed to have toy guns.
Okay.
What we weren't allowed to do was watch a ton of TV and stuff like that. So not into G.I. Joe. My introduction to all of that stuff is through the Energon universe. Like my creativity for G.I. Joe like was not peaked until I started reading the Energon universe. And I realized that I actually had some like really off-target preconceived notions about what G.I. Joe was. I had no idea. Like we just watched the 80s movie.
Yeah, with Globulus.
Globulus
and Cobra Law.
And I was like, this is way trippier than I anticipated. I thought that like G.I. Joe was like way more literal about like, oh, it's a TV show about the U.S. military, and it is not that at all. It is high fantasy. I don't know.
Science fiction.
Yeah,
science fiction plays a big part in the G.I. Joe.
Yeah, wild.
Wow. Yeah. So Lisa, your experience of G.I. Joe is, I guess, basically at the moment 3 comic books: Duke 1, Cobra Commander 1, and G.I. Joe 303.
Yeah. So reading G.I. Joe 303, I was really dependent on those context clues. And just going like, Brad, what does this mean? And Brad's like, I don't know.
Because that's the thing, right? Like, I was really into the Marvel G.I. Joe comics, but I don't even think I made it all the way to issue 155 of the Marvel run back in the day. And at the, so I'm missing 160 issues worth of continuity. So when I picked up issue 300, when Skybound joined the party, I was like, there's a female Snake Eyes, it looks like. Oh, what's going on here? At the same time, I also felt like issue 300 wasn't too complicated, and I had such a great time with it that I was like, well, I'll figure it out. I can read some Wikipedia entries as well.
Sure, why not?
Just to fact check, you're talking about 301, Skybound's first.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Another preconceived notion that I had about the G.I. Joe is from like the meme of like G.I. Joes like at the end of every episode of the television show, I guess.
Yeah, the PSAs.
They would have like this kind of like moral of the story. So I was anticipating like something a little bit more moralistic. and I don't know. I'm going to have to really search for my takeaways from this issue number 303. I don't know what I've learned about myself from this issue.
The TV show continuity and the comic book continuity are different.
Yes.
This isn't like Star Wars where it's all one story.
Yes.
So yeah, Brad, I kind of assumed that that you'd kind of covered the kept up as you were going along, but so you've got a bit of a gap there. But it's interesting, sort of back in the day, particularly in the 80s and so on, we were sort of getting into comics. You would just pick up with a random issue, like G.I. Joe 104, like you mentioned earlier, and you sort of just have to, get all of the context clues, figure things out, have the mystery of everything that came before as just a little bit of a puzzle to unpick, and that's how it used to work before the days of resetting with a brand new issue 1 and brand new starting point every few issues. So I guess G.I. Joe's a rare exception.
I miss that because it might take a few issues, but you'll get there,
Mm-hmm.
and that was my experience with the Amazing Spider-Man or Captain America or Ninja Turtles at the time, and then that would then propel you into the back issue bins and starting to catch up that way. And I still have strong nostalgic feelings for operating with comics in such a fashion.
I feel like children, though, are also more comfortable with not knowing.
Yeah, because they're stupid.
Right. Well, because they were just barely born. Like, you were 10.
Yeah.
And so you were really accustomed to not knowing what the hell is going on,
I
right?
had just learned what a snake was. And I was like, oh, snake eyes. Got it.
Putting it together. And I try to enter comics. I try to recapture that childlike sense of wonder when I enter a new story. But it is, as an adult, it is hard to go like, well, I don't get it. I'm putting it down. And I try to kind of stifle that adult knee-jerk reaction. I want to enter it with the mind and open heart of a child.
One of the things that I think about in the modern world where with DVD box sets and streaming, everyone is aware of seasons in a way that when I was a kid, we were not. Like, you knew that there were new episodes of a show. The new season would start in September, but you weren't really concerned about if this one episode was season 3 or season 5 of your favorite sitcom. And I remember being really somewhat aware when G.I. Joe or DuckTales was running in the afternoons. And one week there might be like one of the 2-parters or miniseries. And then later in the week or the next week, there'd be episodes that had originally aired before or after that. And the syndicates were airing out of order. Like when you watched reruns of Different Strokes or Three's Company or MASH, they were running them out of order. And with a show like Lost, or now sort of every single show, we all watch them in order. Mm-hmm. And my first issue of G.I. Joe was, issue 90, and a bunch of stuff had happened and I had no idea. And that issue had a bunch of footnotes in it, which referred to other issues. So I like this idea that kids, or when we were younger, or when the sort of structure of how to take in our entertainment was less precise, we all just sort of winged it. And like, I read an issue of G.I. Joe and it refers to someone dying in a previous issue. And sooner or later, I got that issue at a convention or a store or a mail order. And in the back of my mind, I must have remembered that was the issue where someone dies, but it's still a surprise. And you don't have that kind of serendipity when you are only watching your show in order, when you're only reading, I won't read the 5 new issues because I missed an issue. I'm going to wait till the collection comes out, or I'm going to wait till my friend mails me the one issue I'm missing, and then I can catch up. And in the last couple of years, 1 or 2 other monthlies that I like, but that I'm not as worried about having an amazing reading experience. Occasionally I have sort of misplaced an issue because I've got piles of comics around, like Firepower, this wonderful Robert Kirkman comic.
Oh, yeah.
We love
so
Firepower.
Good.
Okay, so just randomly, I was reading issue 24 and I thought, the dragon seems to be further along. And then a week later, I found issue 23 in a pile, next to my bed. And I thought, I brought this home in a stack of comics and I forgot to read it. So I read 2 issues out of order, and it didn't ruin my day, and it didn't betray my fandom against Skybound. It was just sort of like being 10 again. And you don't know if the spinner rack at the 7-Eleven is going to have the new issue.
Yeah, I love that. I love everything you've just said. And that experience of going I didn't read issue 23, but I can just pick up 24. I'm trying to embrace that now because I am the type of reader who will let his to-read pile of floppies build, and then I become overwhelmed. And I'm trying to shed that overwhelmedness by just going, well, okay, so I've missed 4 issues of, let's say, Firepower, since you brought it up, but I never would because that comic's so good. How dare you miss an issue? Let's say I've missed a few issues of that. I'll just pick it up and, I'll go back and read them if I find them.
Yeah. I bought a ton of the free Comic Book Day issue 1 of Firepower for my store, so I am a good Firepower fan.
He doesn't want to damage his Firepower cred there. Let's just cover any other business from last episode briefly. On the Facebook group, there was a retrospective error for 302 that was noticed, which was that one of the Joes had the name badge Welker. And Frank Welker was the voice of Short Fuse, which is one of the Joes. So I think probably what has happened there is that a bit of Google foo has sort of said, what is the real name of Short Fuse for the uniform? And they've got the name of the voice actor who portrayed him rather than his file name.
You know why that's okay?
Why's that, Tim?
Because in issue, what was it? 277? The issue with G.I. Joe, that's the spotlight on Law.
Mm-hmm.
This is just from 4 years ago. Law is, in that issue, he's not identified by his toy file name. He's identified by the Hasbro employee whose likeness was sculpted onto the figure. And we thought that was a weird mistake. And then friend of the show, Diana Davis on Facebook, creative consultant, sort of continuity cop on the comic, said something like, maybe that mistake was done on purpose.
Well, no, prized it essentially, but in his subsequent appearance, he did have the more recognizable name. And there was also in the here we go in the guts of things. Rob over on G.I. Joe Berg noticed that in the flashback to Vietnam, Storm Shadow had some swords on his back, which is not part of his normal look. Back then in the day, he did have a bow and arrow, but not swords. So. Yeah, I think we can nopolize this one again. This is maybe the narrator's unreliable memory, sort of conjuring up his picture of how he might remember it rather than how it actually came about, and also maybe just a bit of artistic interpretation, which I give leeway to. Every time an artist has drawn this sort of period, it's looked slightly different. So this is kind of in keeping with that. And then the other thing was just in a bit of news. 302 is getting a reprint, which is great news because it's sort of showing that the book is doing well enough to warrant another reprint. And we're getting a cover from Danny Earls, who's sort of a great emerging talent over the last couple of years, sort of making some big waves. And I actually reached out to him to ask him about the process of doing that cover. So he was kind enough to send us a little message, which I'll play now.
Hey guys, thanks a million for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. I'm delighted to leave a note here on the cover. I mean, what an honor it was to work on a franchise like G.I. Joe. It's incredible. I'm so grateful for that opportunity. I think G.I. Joe, even if someone doesn't know comic books or toys or the franchise, they know what G.I. Joe is. So like to work on such an iconic franchise it was amazing. I really wanted to put my heart and soul into that cover, and I kind of went for a different style of cover. G.I. Joe is action packed and it's kind of in your face and it's intense and it's awesome. But I went for a more kind of quiet, subdued tone right before the action might kick off. I mean, I feel like any other cover would have probably happened 3 seconds after the image that I chose in my cover, Snake Eyes bursting through the windows of the Cobra headquarters. But I kind of chose a quieter scene leading up to that. I wanted to give the landscape of what I thought a Cobra headquarters might look like up in the snowy mountains, and Snake Eyes is able to find it. So yeah, to draw anything in that universe, I'm absolutely honored. That's all I can kind of say. I hope to work on it again in the future. The fact that it's hitting so hard now, like the artists have Chris Mooneyham and obviously on Duke as well. You have Tom Riley, the writers they have on it. I mean, it's amazing. So I couldn't be more honored, excited, and just absolutely chuffed to work on that cover. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks there to Danny Earls for giving us that message all about the second print cover to 302, which features a striking image of Snake Eyes descending down the outside of a Cobra HQ, as seen through the window with a couple of Cobra troopers on guard, none the wiser. I saw a couple of comments suggesting that possibly there might be an homage to issue 21, Silent Interlude, with the Snake Eyes rappelling down. I think that's probably more coincidental than anything else. Worth probably noting that Danny is actually an Irish footballer as well as artist. He was scouted and signed as a teenager to Premier League side Aston Villa, played football for the Republic of Ireland, and had a 9-year professional career in the USA before doing a career left turn and becoming a professional comic book artist and doing very well at it. So, Joe Admin, done. Let's get into things. I just, following up on that opening song, and generously calling it a song, let's just talk Scarlett and Snake Eyes a little bit. I have been sort of ruminating and thinking about their relationship, and this plays a little bit into the issue that we've read that twice now Snake Eyes has been shut down. In issue 300, Scarlett said to him, "Shh, don't say another word." And in 302, "Shh, not now." So the expression is once is happenstance, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is a pattern. So I guess we're on coincidence now, but in my mind, we're forming a pattern. And my thoughts are, there could be 3 main things. 1, you don't need to talk. I already know what you're going to say. 2, enough talking, more kissing. Or 3, the Snake Eyes I fell in love with didn't talk. If you talk, you're shattering the illusion that you are the same person and not a crazy freak clone in the really mixed up relationship that we've somehow ended up in. As the relationship experts, if not necessarily the G.I. Joe lore from the last few hundred issues, did you guys sort of have ideas, thoughts about this relationship that Scarlett has got with the clone Snake Eyes?
I love Snake Eyes and Scarlett together, and I did have that feeling reading the previous 2 issues of like, okay, what is the deal here? But then we get to this issue, and the kissy has already happened, and the fighting begins, and I loved the action sequence, and I love seeing these 2 just decimate some fools together. And Chris Mooneyham illustrates that sequence so beautifully. I just want good for them. Of course we're Comicbook Couples Counseling, so we're hoping for some serious Snake Eyes and Scarlett content, but we don't really have much here, but we have the promise of it. I hope that promise is eventually delivered with some actual, kissy, romance, relationship content.
I see a lot of they do truly share their lives because they have Timber. And in this scene, Timber answers to both Snake Eyes and Scarlett, which I think shows a balance in their relationship.
Yeah, they're good dog parents or wolf parents.
But it is hard to get that work-life balance when you're a couple who works together.
And you're constantly being attacked.
Yeah. It's really, if you're a G.I. Joe, it's really hard to, leave work at work and, deepen your connection with your partner.
I don't want to get too far into the detail of the issue itself, but what you're saying does sort of prompt a question to me that let's talk about this maybe once we get into the middle of the issue itself. But that and opening that scene, they are lying in bed together, but they are back to back, which as a shorthand maybe points to possibly something maybe not quite right. But then when they're attacked, they're on an autopilot, and maybe it's that combat situation that is the more comfortable environment for them to relate to each other as a couple, and maybe the more coupley stuff, particularly given the new dynamics of Snake Eyes as a returned clone, is maybe the more troublesome stuff. But let's talk about who brought this fine issue to us. It was delivered by writer Larry Hama, artist Chris Mooneyham, colorist Francesco Segala, with Flatter also credited, which is nice, Sabrina Del Grosso, letterer Pat Brusso, and editor and Alex Antoni, publication design Gillian Crabb, creative consultant Diana Davis.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
The cover to 303 is penciled ink by Andy Kubert and colored by Brad Anderson. And this is Serpentor Khan. The camera, there's no background. There's flame behind him. He's holding his cape with his right hand, and his fist is out and up, a little up and past you, his left hand, his left arm, and he's looking up and past you, and his mouth is open. There's a little bit of contrapposto to his pose. Though he is just standing there, this is a really active cover because his pose is not flat and symmetrical. The two snakes that make up his collar are alive, and they are hissing, and they are not at the same altitude. Andy Kubert drops the two bottom fangs from Serpentor's mask, but I guess in the interiors, Chris Mooneyham has as well. Serpentor Rex here is the zombie, so his skin is green and has boils on it. So in that way, he sort of matches the snakes. Brad Anderson does a gorgeous job with red reflected light on the bottom of Serpentor Khan's pecs, his six-pack, sort of underside of the arm that's thrust out, under and on some of the sides of these two snakes. This cover, this is what I was talking about in our last episode about how some upcoming covers, so the last two covers focused on Joes and vehicles. And this cover focuses on villains or villain and no vehicles and no background. But I think a cover should ask a question and the comic should answer it. And I think that comes from Stephen Grant. I didn't invent that. But when I read that in a column of his, I thought, yeah, so maybe I'd always had the unfocused inkling. This cover does not ask a question, but you can occasionally just draw a badass hero or villain, and that's enough to get someone in a store seeing this on the shelf to pick it up and say, well, this looks cool. Okay, what is so exciting about this cover is how bold it is. And I just want to compare this to a bunch of covers that were published during the IDW run on the book, where it was a character or two, maybe just standing there or maybe kind of standing there with their weapons drawn, looking out at you. And those covers were less exciting and less dynamic. And Andy Kubert is a cover artist. He's also a great interior artist. There are comics artists who can draw covers, but maybe shouldn't, because their stuff is a little tepid. And Andy Kubert is a cover artist. He draws bold and exciting covers. Interestingly here, the camera is at waist height and is looking slightly up at Serpentor. That's part of why this cover is so exciting. Cover B is a black and white version of this, just Kubert's inks and no color. It is still bold and exciting, and if you have both of them in front of you or JPEGs of both, it's fun to do a little back and forth comparison to see how much dimension Brad Anderson is adding in the color, because Kubert draws only 3 or 4 lines to indicate where the flame is, and Anderson creates a lot more depth in the background. Cover C is the 1 in 10 incentive cover drawn by Brad Walker and colored by series colorist Segala. And as with the previous two, it is one Joe in the foreground attacking, full body, and one Cobra in the background, head and shoulders, not physically there, but montage-ishly there, looming over the scene. In this case, it's Scarlett, and she's jumping. She's lunging with both arms outward, and she's firing her crossbow. Behind her, it's Dr. Mindbender. Foreground is all in red tones, and that's not just because of the fire, right? Look at the gray on her legs. That's not a normal gray. That's a warm gray. It's not a neutral gray. And then the background is all cool, so purples and blues. So that's how foreground and background get separated. Mindbender, actually like cover A. Mindbender is higher than us. We're looking up at him. He's looking down at us. Brad Walker draws such a great Dr. Mindbender because he's cartooning just a little bit, like 10%. The eyes, the mustache, the mouth, right? Brad Walker draws, quote, realistically. He's not a cartoony artist, but there's just a little bit of exaggeration in here. And you get the sense that this isn't just any person with a mustache and a monocle, that this is Dr. Mindbender specifically. This is a wonderful, exciting cover. And as with the previous two, if you're going to do a cover, the previous two 1 in 10 variants, if you're going to do a cover where it's, quote, just a hero looking cool or firing their weapon and just a villain in the background, this is the way to do it.
Right. And then we've got a continuation of the Mike Mayhew retailer exclusives via direct from Mike Mayhew, this time spotlighting Lady J in a very similar cover to one that actually appeared in the IDW run. Let's move on to a plot breakdown to summarize what this story is all about.
Plot breakdown.
Alpha 001 arrives on Cobra Island to give Serpentor Khan a proposition to upgrade his mutant army to enhanced cyborg weaponry. A demonstration is given to show an upgraded Blue Ninja against a casino bot, BAT. The upgraded Blue Ninja deploys shields to deflect the missiles and make short work of the Bat with its energy sabers. A Viper is then the first test subject to be transformed, adding a lifelike shell so that he can pass for human. In Utah at Camp Greer, the Joes see the Serpentor Revanche collaboration and Duke asks Spirit to put the pit on full defensive alert. He will ramp up from giving 100% to 200% effort. Later, Spirit spies 3 cybernetically enhanced Vipers snooping at the base's perimeter. In Springfield, Dawn Moreno visits her parents to let them know she is fine. And in the High Sierras, an enhanced Blue Ninja kill squad is sent to take out Snake Eyes and Scarlett. A noise disturbs their slumber, and they disappear into the eaves of the cabin when the Blue Ninjas enter. The Blue Ninjas are taken down by sword, throwing stars, crossbow bolts, and a borrowed energy saber. The remaining cyborg sets Kamikaze Destructo mode. Serpentor Alpha 1 and Mindbender get a brief transmission of video which seems to show Snake Eyes, Scarlett, and Timber dead on the cabin floor. Dun dun dun! So let's get into the detail. Let's start with saying something nice. Let's go. Brad and Lisa, do you want to pull out one thing first that you liked about this issue?
Well, we've already talked briefly about the Scarlett and Snake Eyes sequence. I think that sequence is exceptional. I think the illustration of the fight is great. I think Chris Mooneyham overall is a magnificent addition to the G.I. Joe canvas. And one of the reasons why I was so excited for Skybound to get a hold of this franchise.
Excellent.
I'm impressed with how dense this issue is. Like, clearly there are a lot of moving parts in these stories, and I feel like each story has its opportunity to move forward and create more drama. And they do a really good job of saying everybody's name. Like, I'm coming fully in medias res. I have no idea what the hell is going on, but they take the time to say everybody's name, so I at least know who every single person is. And
even if it's not a person, you know that, like, okay, this is a Viper, this is a Bat, this is a Blue Ninja.
Right. That was briefly confusing, because sometimes I was like, oh, did the G.I. Joes call them one thing, and the Cobra people call them another thing? So it took a little bit of, like, I had to turn my brain gears a little bit, but I feel like they do a really good job of going, like, hey, if you missed issue 302... this is who everybody is.
That's a really interesting observation, because one of my observations was that there seemed to be less naming of characters than there normally is. I mean, it's something that Larry Hama always makes a point of in his script of naming characters, so you're absolutely aware of who everyone is. But, like, on that sort of G.I. Joe sequence particularly, there's a good few Joes that they don't need to be named because you can completely follow the story without it. But there's Stalker, Dial Tone, Mainframe, and then later on Lady J. And I don't think any of those...
No, I had to ask Brad who that was. I was like, does Scarlett have short hair? And he's like, definitely no. I'm like, okay.
Okay, Tim.
My positive thing is going to be the 2-page scene in Springfield where Dawn is reunited with her parents. Everything about this scene, every panel, the story logic of it that was set up in a previous issue, that Dawn was introduced way back in the 220s, I think, maybe the early 230s, as a citizen of Springfield and like a high school member. Was it the Cobra Youth Brigade?
Talent spotted at the Cobra lacrosse tryouts.
Right, thank you. This scene is well written, well staged, well drawn, well dialogued, and that final word balloon, right? When Dawn says, Dawn and her parents are hugging, and she says, "I know you're not going to turn me in." And her mom says, "We would never turn you in, sweetheart." And her dad says, "Never in a million years." And she looks at the camera and she says, "I know," which makes me think, oh, they might turn her in. Or, no, Hama is actually not cynical about a character like this. And she is saying that assuredly. And either way, it's good drama.
I get the sense, like, from that panel with no context other than the few panels, like that Dawn is counting on her not being turned in because she is up to no good. Right?
Like,
right?
I
find
get
that panel
some
to be
menace
ominous.
there. Yeah. Ominous. That's an even better word.
Like she's going to go plant a bomb or something?
I have no idea, but she's like, I'm counting on my parents to hide me because I am about to do something that is terrible.
Or at least against Springfield.
Yeah, a couple of pages earlier, Duke sort of sets it up fairly subtly as saying that he's going to put a sneak and peek team into Springfield. So I think Dawn is part of that team. So it's
she's
like
going to sneak and or peek.
Yeah, so her parents might be acting kind of in good faith and not going to turn in Dawn, but Dawn might be getting up to mischief on the Joe's behalf in Springfield with both sneaking and peeking.
Okay.
Mark, what is your starting out one good thing about the issue?
I think it's probably the art generally. There's a lot of heft to it, and I think it elevates the book. But specifically, I really liked the Bat versus the Revanche. That this is the Casino Bat versus the Revanche robot sequence, and you've got that kind of that shook panel where it gets sort of cut in half, and that whole sort of sequence just put me in mind of some of those kind of films with kind of very artful, cinematography, like, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, that kind of thing with the falling leaves, all of that kind of good stuff. It's it kind of looks a lot more artful than it probably deserves, this sequence.
Lisa, since this is your first issue of A Real American Hero, and maybe you're already a step ahead because you asked Brad a bunch of questions, but not for us to answer, but so you can remind us of the point of view of someone who's brand new to this. What are your questions, having now read this issue?
What are my questions? Like, to me, in this issue, there is a lot of progress on many fronts, but I don't know what those fronts are like at all. Like, when I read a comic, I'm of like a very character-focused individual, and like, to me, when I read a comic, I want to know the characters a little bit better. Like, I have no idea what Dawn's loyalties are, how she feels being a high school student who seems to be thrust into the middle of a really high stakes situation. I'm just curious about everybody's feelings. Like, is everyone okay? Does everybody feel like they have autonomy? Do they feel satisfied by being part of what they're being? Like, from
your point of view, what is the plot?
Yeah.
What's the bigger plot of this comic?
I I haven't the foggiest idea.
Well, so you have like Serpentor on Cobra Island. He's
Yes.
talking to this AI type group. They're making like a collaboration.
Yeah, so to me there seems to be some kind of it's like not a Cold War because they're fighting all of the time, but like there seems to be this kind of pressure that everybody scale up. You know what I mean? Like where it's just like we've got zombies, we've got cybernetic zombies, but can we make them fully more robot cybernetic zombies, where I feel like they all feel this pressure to continuously scale up. And like I'm impressed at the level of surveillance the GI Joes have, and they really seem pretty pleased to just kind of sit back and watch right now. I don't know. What is the plot? No idea.
It's a good point.
But have I ever cared about plot? Like, I feel like I don't actually care what the plot is. I care more about the who than the why.
It's interesting you're saying this, and I'm not going to answer all of those questions, but Larry Hama, who writes this comic, has said in interviews or when he posts online, when he consumes a story, movies, TV, books, he is not interested in plot, he's interested in character. And pretty regularly in the last 5 years, people are talking about the new It show on streaming, and he'll say, I watched a couple episodes, I don't like any of the characters, I'm not going to continue. Or he would say, I'm not concerned about if the plot here is sort of working or not. It's the characters that are carrying it for me. There are also shows where he says, the story's amazing and the characters are amazing. Brad, so you have read 3 issues of this current series.
Yes.
You've also read 40 or 50 issues way back.
Yes.
What are your questions?
Well, the issue 301, ends with the mutagen bomb going off, and we have obviously, Cobra Commander's got his things going on, and Serpentor Khan has his things going on, and so there's so much villainy that is shattered, and each one wants to be on top, and so they're kind of having like a civil war right now.
Okay.
And G.I. Joe is trying to figure out, well, how do we combat, or do we even bother to combat? Do we just sit back and let these various fractions eat themselves?
Literally.
That's my understanding of what's going on. Now, Don Marino, I know, is the female Snake Eyes, and I, as of this issue, I now understand has ties to Springfield and Cobra, because Lisa Springfield is like where Cobra does its thing.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's
it's like a little Nazi
Cobra
country.
Suburbs.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So all of those people, like Marino's family, the Marino family might actually be bad. Bad guys?
They're complicit in what Springfield's up to.
Oh my.
They're like any other American. Like they're complicit to what America's up to.
They're just like paying HOA dues and going like, whatever happens, happens.
Hey, I got a pool.
Do you know what my most legitimate question is, and you're not going to be able to answer it, but like, what does Serpentor Khan look like when he gets up in the morning? You know what I mean? Because
is he sleeping in that snake suit?
Yeah, is he like clearly, to me, the unitard thing looks comfortable, and I imagine that he has like one of those foam heads that he puts his.
But these
his
snakes
thing.
are
They're
alive. Yeah.
But they're really short, right? Because you don't see the rest of their body. Like, because do you
think it's like a Venom symbiote?
I have no, are they attached in the back? Is it a 2-sided snake?
I don't ever remember seeing Serpentor Khan out of the costume.
Yeah.
Out of the snake's skin suit.
But then also, if you look at his the ends of his hair, like clearly he's doing some kind, he has some face framing layers. We see that. But does he do but the ends of his hair are curled in. Does he have one of those Dyson air blower things, or does he sleep in those where you wrap your hair around a thing and then
we're gonna have to consult the experts on their podcast.
But Like, what does he look like naked?
Well, we have seen him naked because he was cloned recently. And
Okay.
he came out of the tank naked, so he looks like.
So did he have snakes on him?
No. He looks like Genghis Khan.
Okay.
Because he's Genghis Khan.
Okay, yeah.
And then he puts on this uniform.
Then he puts on the uniform, and then are the snakes in like a terrarium?
The
They
snakes,
sleep with him.
the snakes are kind of like how artists draw Batman's cape.
Oh, okay.
It's all artistic license.
Uh-huh.
I think if you look at the original toy design, you would argue that it's just like a fabric part of the costume.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And in the TV show, they don't animate because that costume is really difficult to animate already. In the animated movie, you might remember, there is 1 or 2 shots where the snakes do move as if they're alive.
Uh-huh.
But I think artists are just having fun, and we're not meant to think too hard about what's happening behind Serpentorcon's
I
neck.
wonder if it's like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, where like, you know, you could tell like her emotions or what she was going to decide based on like the necklace that she was wearing. Like, you know, she had her like I'm dissenting kind of necklace thing. I wonder if it's like that, where he puts on his angry snakes when he's in an angry mood, and he puts on his chill snakes when he's like, today it's a chill day for me, Serpentor.
That was a comparison I was not expecting.
I think every day is an angry day for Serpentor.
I don't know. Maybe it's like a mood ring.
But we've not seen him naked since he turned into a zombie. So he's probably
So I'm going to ask each character what they look like naked, and I expect a really straightforward answer.
Actually, that is a good point and sort of answers Lisa's question. I think now that all these people at the casino have been turned into zombies, I think they don't take off their clothes to put on pajamas at night.
Right.
I think they're just wearing these clothes, and these clothes
All the
only get
time.
dirtier and more torn over time.
Some of these guys, their limbs have turned into like sort of freaky to tentacles, and there was a kind of Cthulhu-looking zombie in one of the backgrounds.
Yeah, that
with
Viper.
Sort of...
Oh man, I want that action figure.
freaky stuff hanging out of his front. Yeah.
Here's a point that I want to make. I'm going to make a larger point about Chris Mooneyham's work on this a little later in the episode, but I'm torn because on the one hand, I like how much ink he's using, and I think he's drawing digitally, but I like how much ink he's using and how there's a really nice structure of black and white, of dark and light in the pages. That said, he doesn't seem particularly interested in showing off the costumes of the world of G.I. Joe. And some of that is because there are a lot of close-ups, and some of that is because a lot of characters are in shadow. So, you know, I'm looking at this issue. We have this entirely new character, this blue ninja that we haven't seen before. These are the ones that walk on page 4, right, with that transformation tank. And there's a panel where 3 of them are approaching. And some of this is Segala coloring, very dark. And some of this is Hama's plotting, right? I don't think this page calls for necessarily a big panel revealing the new revised Blue Ninjas. But there are 3 of them walking toward us. All right. And then on the next page, one of them is involved in a fight. And again, it's drawn very small and far away several times. And then a couple pages later, a Viper is transformed, and then you have to wait until later to see what happens, right? So now I'm on this page where I'm getting to my actual point here. We're on this page where it says in Utah at the front. It's the one where the Vipers and the Blue Ninja are creeping up on Camp Greer, and Spirit is on the bottom with a white background listening, talking into his ear. And again, it's nighttime and there are a lot of shadows. That makes sense, and this is how Mooneyham draws. But those are 2 Cobra Vipers and a Blue Ninja, and Mooneyham is not interested or is not available, some of this might be plotting, to show me these costumes. Like, I don't get to enjoy what the zombie Cobra characters look like because they're very small, they're behind something, they're in shadow. And part of the thrill for me of every G.I. Joe story, because I love how the characters look, and I think of Joes as color combinations, you know, like Shipwreck, like white, light blue, dark blue, you know, like this is not like a flashy image book from 1993 where there are a lot of like pinup pages where like a character is standing there like saying something threatening, or they like show up and the artist gets to draw a page that really acts like a cover with no background. This is not that, but there are like cool new characters here, or cool variations of characters, and like I can't really tell, like which of the background Cobra characters are like regular Cobra soldiers, which are Vipers. And I'm going to pin a lot of this on Mooneyham in his storytelling and in his sort of inking and shading.
I was just going to say, there's a description there from the Joes where they talk about spotting them and calling them out as upgraded versions of the Viper, Toxo Viper and Techno Viper. But I've no idea how the Joes are telling that, because there isn't any visual cues that tell you that it's going to be these different types of Vipers. So yeah, some of that kind of cool design of the different types of Cobra Vipers is a little bit missing.
I don't know. Like for me, I'm in love with what Mooneyham is doing in this series. And as far as like the Blue Ninjas are concerned, I definitely see where Tim is coming from. But I also feel like this book embraces style in a way that the IDW, A Real American Hero series, did not, where it really embraced design. And it's like, okay, this is what a figure looks like. It's like flatly colored. It's bright. But this, with like the Blue Ninjas in, like to focus in on them, I'm like, you get the introduction on page 1. Page 2, it's Bat versus Blue Ninja. It is a small figure, but I think it is a striking figure. And then when we get to the 3rd page of the Blue Ninja, where the Blue Ninja slices that casino bat in half, that is like a Mike Mignola panel, that top panel. And it is mostly in shadow, but I find it to be badass. And then when we turn the page and we see the Cthulhu Viper very tiny on that middle panel, it is small. It is not a splash page, but in that smallness, there is still like incredible detail. And I'm reading it on an iPad. And when you zoom in on those Cthulhu Vipers, like I think they look incredible for as tiny as they are. And then when we do get the action sequence with Snake Eyes, Scarlett, and the Blue Ninjas, they look amazing. Like I love them. You don't get body shots, but those torso shots, those interesting camera angles that we're getting, to me, it all just screams action and movement. And I get enough of the design where I can piece together what the toy is.
But I do see what Tim is saying, where we get a pretty good shot of the costume behind Duke on this screen. Like it's not like
on
high
page
detail.
13.
It's not like high detail, but you do get a good, I think a fairly good look at it. But that's like a completely different set of priorities than my priorities. Like I don't, I just to me, I'm just like robot guy, boom.
Like I just get like
if I find out, in his past life his name is Steve and he had a husband and a child, then I'm like, what does this costume look like?
Like when we were in Vegas, we did find a copy of G.I. Joe 300, the last IDW issue. Yeah. And we had 300 and 301 opened up together. And like no disrespect to the IDW team. And the IDW team, I'm like, they also hired, like Michel Fife to do like his own series, and they got Tom Scioli to do that Transformers series, and I adored the art that was going on there. But I just look at A Real American Hero 300, and then I look at Skybound's Real American Hero 301, and like, this is where I want to live. I want to live in texture, shadow, and vibe and style.
I think this might be a good transition to my other major comment. But before I talk for 3 minutes, Mark, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to note while we were on that page in the pit with the Blue Ninja on the screen, the world that we often live in is sort of looking at that page and going, well, that's Lady J there, but she's been coloured with pink hair, short pink hair. And when we see a character who's got short pink hair, that's normally Zorana. So potentially room for confusion there. But I do like the mood of the colouring, even if possibly you sort of pause for a microsecond and go, hold on, who is that character? But yeah, there's a definite, I think Tim's about to move on to this, there's a definite kind of move to sort of the focusing on the art and the style, and maybe less on the simplicity and clarity of the storytelling. And the pages here are more one that you could take as a page on its own and buy that page and hang it on your wall, because there's a lot of grit and mood and a lot of texture, and the characters are sort of one point perspective looking at us in the audience, and generally each one of these pages looks pretty cool in isolation as an individual piece of art separate from the whole, which is probably not something you could necessarily say about most of the IDW run, where a page in isolation, you're not going to necessarily, it's not going to be as exciting in itself, other than servicing the story, even if it is well put together and clear to follow and all that kind of good stuff.
Okay. I had strong feelings about this issue, and they were so strong, I sent an email. I sent a letter to Postbox the Pit.
Right.
And I just want to, I want to start out by saying Chris Mooneyham draws well. His faces, his shadows, his textures. Brad is absolutely right. There is so much texture and shadow and style and verve and mood in not just this issue, but these 3 issues. And a lot of G.I. Joe during the Marvel era was what I would consider, and this is an imprecise and unfair title, but I would consider Marvel house style of the 1980s. There are 15 artists working at Marvel in the 80s, some of whom drew G.I. Joe and others who don't, who all draw on this very reliable, clear, attractive style, right? These are not like Bill Sienkiewicz. These are not, Arthur Adams. These are not those guys. And final third of the Marvel run, the book starts to get a little bit of some different influences, right? Like Andrew Wildman and Phil Gaugier are looking at different things. The IDW run, 2/3 of it are drawn by one guy. And his storytelling is crystal clear, and his penciling doesn't have this Chris Mooneyham amount of style and texture and shadow and oomph and verve. But Shannon Gallant's storytelling, his character acting, his poses, his fight choreography, where people are in a space, how they're moving from one place to another, how they're acting and interacting and reacting to each other. In the IDW run, it's great. And what I always wanted was like a really, really heavy sort of stylist finisher, like a Klaus Janson, to not just ink, but like really ink on top of those pencils. Okay, what's happening with Chris Mooneyham is that he doesn't draw 3-point perspective or 2-point perspective. He only draws 1-point perspective and optical perspective. 1 and 2 and 3-point perspective, right? The full term is linear perspective, linear as in lines. And if you think of diagonal lines, if you're in a kitchen looking at a linoleum floor, or you're in a school or hospital and you're looking at the ceiling and there are those rectangular ceiling panels, right? And you look down the hall, all those diagonal lines converge on a point, either at the wall at the end or like in the distance past where you can see. Optical perspective is just arranging overlapping things in front of other things and making things bigger and smaller to create a sense of depth. So an example of that would be page 3 of this new issue of G.I. Joe. The first panel where Alpha 001 is talking to Serpentor Khan. There's no linear perspective here. There are no diagonal lines which show that like a wall or a ceiling or a floor or buildings or like objects are like diminishing in space as they move away from the camera. Mooneyham draws some things bigger and some things smaller, and he draws some things in front of and behind other things. And that creates depth, and that's fine. But flip back to page 1. First panel. This is 1-point perspective. And you can see the diagonal lines on the floor. right? They all converge on a point that's actually about lined up with Mainframe's chair, seated at that console. But the wall with this computer monitor, we are perpendicular to it. And that's what 1-point perspective is. If you are staring straight down a hallway or straight at a wall or straight at a side of a building, you're not looking left or right, you're not looking up and down. That's 1-point perspective. And there is so much of this comic that is only 1-point perspective. And Mooneyham almost never draws 2-point, and he doesn't draw 3-point. And 2-point would be if you are like looking down that hall or looking at a building and you turn your head a little bit to the left or the right. And 3-point would be if you tilt your head a little bit up or a lot up or down, right? Think of like Superman comics where Superman's flying through a city and we're looking down at a bunch of buildings, or we're looking up at like Daredevil or Batman swinging through some buildings, all those diagonal lines on the edges of buildings and for the windows, right? There's none of that here. Now, there are artists in comics who pull this off really well. Mike Mignola is one example. Think of all of his Hellboy comics. Mignola never draws linear perspective, but he also is writing his comics, and so he gets to put them in places like dungeons and like fields, countrysides, catacombs, and he's such a visual stylist, you don't need it. And he is constructing a story so that like Hellboy can just be in a cave and you draw a couple curly lines and a bunch of black. It's like, well, he's in a cave, right? What I see Mooneyham doing here is really limited, and it's making the storytelling and my enjoyment of the story much less, because I keep seeing the same panel over and over and over. So page 1, panel 1, straight on shot. Page 2, panel 2, straight on shot. Page 3, panels 3 and 4 and 5, straight on shot. Page 4, panel 1 and 2 and 3, straight on shot, right? Mooneyham is not moving the camera around enough. He's not fine-tuning it. He's moving it around a lot, but we're always perpendicular with the thing we're looking at. And there are so many like close-ups of Serpentor Khan's face that it gets like distracting. And I think this gets better later in the issue, right? The 2-page scene with Dawn and her family, good. The fight with Scarlett and Snake Eyes, good. But I'm seeing a lot of limitations in Mooneyham's storytelling, and they haven't gotten better over the 3 issues. And this guy went to the Kubert school. So I think he needs to work from someone else's layouts. And that's where I land. I think he draws well. I think he doesn't story tell well.
I think your knowledge of perspective is ruining your good time.
Yeah. I feel like I do have a different set of priorities when I'm looking at Mooneyham's art. But yeah.
Mark?
You thinking where to go from Tim's Debbie Downer?
Okay, well, I'll say something nice.
Okay.
Brad made this point. It is so incredible to be reading not just this issue, but now the 3rd issue, where there is so much delicious, tasty, like eyeball delightful visual style. Right?
Yeah, but the way I would describe it is its style, its vibe, its mood, it's also emotion. And I get a lot more emotion in these 3 issues than I have in the few times that I have picked up the earlier IDW stuff. Now, you make excellent points. I definitely see what you're saying. It doesn't bother me as much as it bothers you. And maybe it is a trade-off. But I also feel like when he does, in the back half of the issue, he does switch perspective up enough in the action sequences for me to, frickin' enjoy them.
And in a lot of the panels that you're talking about, there is a lot of dialogue happening where, like, I feel like the informationally, it's a little bit more dense than in the fight scene in the bedroom of Snake Eyes and Scarlett, for example, where he does get a little bit more dynamic with his perspective.
Here's my final sort of note on this, and I think this offers some proof that there's an issue with Mooneyham's drawing this book. On the 3rd to last page, the ninja attacking Snake Eyes says, "Irk, he's twisting the blade. And then on the next page, it says, the edge is facing up now. And the other one who's on its shoulders says, to what end? And then Snake Eyes says, the better to slice upwards through both your bodies, which he then does. And if characters are telling me what's happening, that means the art is not showing me what's happening.
Well, I agree with that, but I feel like you can take those word balloons out and the page is perfectly fine.
This reminds me of this thing in like 60s comics where there's a narration box and it's like Spider-Man swinging through the city, and Spider-Man swinging through the city, and Spider-Man's thinking, I'm swinging through the city. It's like, I know.
Yeah, and you get it on the first page of this book where it's like, what are we looking at here, Stalker? And Stalker's like, well, it's a helicopter, and we have a helicopter on the screen. And is that an artist's problem or is that a writer's problem?
I think what's happening on the third to last page and the second to last page is that, I'm going to use a film term here, Mooneyham didn't pick the right camera angles. I need another panel which shows like a close-up of either Snake Eyes' hands holding the sword where it's very clear that it's the blade edge up, or if there's like 3 small panels in a row where he's like twisting the sword, or he like tosses the sword and then grabs it from the other orientation. I think the first page, I don't think that's Hama overcompensating for unclear storytelling. I think that's a first page bringing you into the story, because Hama is not writing for a graphic novel collection. He's writing for a monthly comic. But this bit with the sword on the end is like a blinking red light for me. Like, oh, Mooneyham, you didn't get this right.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, fair enough. But I feel like he did. Like for my taste, he did, and continues to do so.
Yeah. I think that's what it comes down to. Is like, what might be an issue for one reader is not necessarily an issue for another reader. Where like a problem might be a problem for you, but it's not necessarily a problem for Brad or myself.
Fair enough. This is not specific to this issue, but Hama has said a few times before that sometimes he has to write additional dialogue to make clear something that an artist on a book doesn't make clear in the visual storytelling. Mark, where do you land on this?
Tying into the kind of this last scene, I was overall a little bit disappointed by the issue, and the main reason for that is nothing about any of the points we've spoken about thus far, beyond seeing a lot of like people looking directly into the camera at one point perspective and thinking, oh no, Tim's going to be talking about this again for half an hour next episode. But it was more the focus on this Blue Ninjas, and this will probably be less of a thing for Brad, having missed a lot of the IDW issues. But a big focus of that IDW period was kind of that Blue Ninja revanche subplot, where there was just a familiar routine of revanche developing a bigger and badder version of the Blue Ninja. And this is the baddest yet, and then they send it off into battle, and the first one is a big boss villain, and it's almost impossible to beat. But then next time around, there's 20 of them, and they take them down, no trouble at all. So I just feel like with this issue, we're falling back a little bit into the old patterns of that Revanche Blue Ninja storyline, kind of feeling very much like deja vu. They've sent in this final sequence, they've sent the Blue Ninjas after Snake Eyes and Scarlett, and in previous issues, they sent the Blue Ninjas after the Arashikage ninjas in their water tower in the yearbook. And there was another similar sequence back in issue 215, 216, where Snake Eyes and Scarlett, this was Throwdown version of Snake Eyes, fighting off the ninjas that were attacking the cabin and pretending to be dead. And then in the subsequent issue, they were Snake Eyes was disguised as what they call Night Creeper, and then revealed himself to Cobra Commander that he hadn't been defeated. He'd snuck in to teach him a lesson. So yeah, it was a little bit falling back into kind of plot points that we've seen an awful lot of before, and I was just kind of hoping for a little bit more of the new and a little bit less of Blue Ninjas.
I had the same reaction Mark made this point, which is when the Blue Ninjas were introduced like 70 issues ago, they were described as unbeatable. And when they attacked some Joes initially, the Joes had a really hard time taking them out. They were armored. They're also ninjas, right? They're not just Cobra bats. They're not just robots. They're ninja robots. And so Joe sort of figured out, like, okay, well, if you shoot it like in the head, and then the next time the Blue Ninjas showed up, in theory, they were just as hard or harder to defeat, but the Joes managed to do it. And then the next time, it just sort of in storytelling got easier. And I keep thinking, no, it should be harder. And if they started out sort of on a scale of 10, they're a 9. That's how hard they are to destroy. And then, 30 issues later, they were a 10. It's like, well, now they're a 13 out of 10, but Snake Eyes and Scarlett, this fight does look hard earned, and I don't want the Blue Ninjas to show up and actually kill Snake Eyes and Scarlett and Timber. But every time we go back to the Blue Ninjas, they're actually just as hard or easy or easier to defeat. And I need something new to happen with that. Like either they go away, or it's like revealed that there's some weakness, like oh, the Joes put a computer virus, and on a scale of 1 to 10, all of the Blue Ninjas are back to a 5 in terms of difficulty.
Because there was the casino bot bats that was defeated in the beginning of this issue, and when that was introduced, that was the biggest, baddest new version of kind of the Blue Ninja iteration. And in the issue they were introduced, the two of the baddest G.I. Joe agents were kind of fought to a almost standstill to defeat one of those, and then the next time they appeared, they were very much treated like cannon fodder. So it kind of felt a little bit similar to that with this one, where this new iteration is the biggest, baddest and defeats the previous biggest, baddest. But then when it comes to fighting Snake Eyes, they're able to take down however many it is here, 6-ish, without breaking too much of a sweat, albeit that they definitely die at the end, and that will be the end of them for sure. No more Snake Eyes and Scarlett.
I have a question, and I can't believe I didn't think about this before, but what are they actually fighting over? Like, what's the actual conflict between the G.I. Joe and the Cobra?
It's not such a silly question, Lisa. It's quite a perceptive thing to be asking. For most of the last run, it is kind of a question that hasn't fully been answered. A lot of the time, it falls back into a kind of a trope of the Cobras want to fight the Joes, and that's kind of almost the end goal without sort of thinking what is the next stage beyond that.
But they have Springfield. Do they want to create a whole bunch of Springfields? Do they want to turn? Is that their idea? Like Cobra Commander, who's not in this issue, is a disaffected American domestic terrorist. Okay.
In the backstory of, a story that's told that takes place before issue 1, before he founds Cobra, and then he slowly builds up this paramilitary army, and it becomes this global operation. And if you're letting the TV show sort of infiltrate, it's like, oh well, the Cobra wants to take over the world. And in the comic, it's much more political, not like actual politics, but sort of grounded in that. Mark, how would you describe this? Like, Cobra Commander wants the American order torn down, but he rarely gets very far with that because he gets so caught up in like sort of the particular like robot or plot of the issue or the 5 or 10 issues, and there's some like personal vendettas back and forth between a few characters, which A, carry the drama long term, but also B, sort of distract from the larger goal. Like right now, Cobra Commander, in the last issue, he headed back to Springfield because he thinks it's going to be invaded by Serpentor Khan.
Yeah. So at the moment, his motivation is, I guess, more of an existential threat that Serpentor Khan is going to supplant him, take over Springfield, and eat everybody. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, yeah, there is a lot of distraction into the kind of like personal beef, I guess, of perhaps trying to go after a specific G.I. Joe like Snake Eyes, because they do have this long tangled history. but then often beyond that, it's like, yeah, it's sort of setting up his own kind of dominion of it, like a Cobra Island away from the sort of American government being in charge. So this whole kind of, disaffection with kind of that element. And then at times as well, it's more just an interest in profit that maybe he's after, some money making scheme. But
so he wouldn't necessarily. We don't have a good picture of like how Cobra Commander would run America differently. Like his main conflict is like, I just wanna be steering the ship, and I don't want anyone else, such as Serpentor to have that power. Like, so he just wants to be in charge. It doesn't matter how or to what end. It's not like if someone else was running America the way that he would run America, like you'd be like, okay, well, he's got it. He's got the right vision there.
I think Cobra Commander early on, he was trying to convince people with his philosophy. There have also been a story or two where he's brainwashing people with a machine.
Yeah. Brainwashing them to think what?
Mark, what's happening in Millville?
I guess it's an unquestioning loyalty to Cobra, but also going in that particular storyline, he went into like a traditional kind of community where there used to be like heavy industry and that's all gone, and there's like unemployment and not the prosperity that there used to be, and he was able to kind of play on that of say, we're here bringing you something different, and we're going to bring back jobs and prosperity, and all you need to do is consent to being brainwashed and fully loyal to Cobra, and some people are okay with that.
Would he then like if we all agreed to be brainwashed, would Cobra then deliver on that? Do you think that he has the means to deliver on that?
Well, back in issue 156, 157, Cobra does take the White House.
Okay. And then what was the first thing that he did?
Mark, I don't remember.
He got distracted by G.I. Joe, I think.
Oh, okay. I just would love to see, like, what's on Cobra Commander's vision board? Because I feel like he's a lost individual. I feel like he is someone who needs to revisit what his ideals actually are.
Mm-hmm.
This is a good point.
Yeah.
I think this actually reflects one of the challenges of this series, which is that there are 300 G.I. Joe and Cobra characters that had toys, and then another 30 or 40 invented for the series non-player characters, like this senator and this doctor scientist and this person's partner or spouse. This random kid who's like an orphan who becomes a ninja. I'm sort of transitioning into one of my other larger points I wanted to make about this issue, which is, I think on the one hand, Hama is interested in sort of future threats and where warfare and technology could go. So here we have these AI characters in the form of the Blue Ninja and Alpha 001. That's a really interesting concept as a villain, as an antagonist for G.I. Joe, and as an antagonist for Cobra, or as teaming up with Cobra. And I think Hama runs into the issue which Mark and I mentioned before, which is that I feel like maybe not enough has been done with the Blue Ninjas, or sort of maybe all that can be done with them has been done. And then I think, there's so many cool Cobra characters who we haven't seen in a while, like Major Blood or Scrap Iron or some of the Dreadnoks, and I'd love to check back in with them. And so I think one of the challenges of writing this book for Larry Hama or anyone writing this book is there are so many characters, and you want to focus on a few so that you can tell some drama. But there are all these fans who have other favorite characters. It's like, well, my favorite character is this obscure G.I. Joe vehicle driver from, 1992. When's he going to be in the comic? And then you also have vehicles, which are these really cool, particular looking things that have specific functions. Like you wouldn't have the Arctic vehicle in the desert story. And vehicles are people's favorites. And Hama is really interested in gear. he's like owned cars and he like likes to fire guns. And so that also wants to get showcased. A comparison might be like X-Men, it's like what's the solution been for the last 20 years with so many X-Men characters? Well, you have 9 monthly X-Men books. And G.I. Joe generally only has 1. And so, we get 20 or 22 pages a month, and it's like, cool, Duke got to do something, and Snake Eyes got to do something, and we saw Spirit. Spirit said something cool. Dial Tone was on page 1. I love Dial Tone. Well, he didn't do anything, but he got to say something. And then, it's another 30 days before I get to check in with, these cool 300 characters and these cool 200 vehicles. So there's this really limited canvas.
I was just thinking what Tim was saying that about the ideology of Cobra, and it was born out of, I guess, the negative about a dissatisfaction with the world around him, that he didn't see himself as getting a fair shake in terms of general makeup of society, and specifically anger around the death of his brother, which he blamed on vicariously on Snake Eyes. So there was these kind of destructive forces around a dissatisfaction and a blaming society and specific individuals for the thing that left him feeling disaffected, and that kind of borne out at Cobra. And there's been elements sort of where there is a clear idea of what he's trying to achieve, of build his own state with Cobra Island and stuff, but it's more often than not brought down by either a distraction of that focused anger, or, for things that ail him as being G.I. Joe or Snake Eyes specifically. And then also, I guess, the disloyalty around Cobra, because I guess if there's a theme of Cobra and G.I. Joe more broadly, it's kind of the loyalty of the Joes that they have for one another, and the disloyalty of Cobra. So there's this constant tussle at the top, and the infighting that they have and the falling out that they have between all of those Cobras is more often than not what sort of brings them down, rather than perhaps something that G.I. Joe is trying to do, which is why you've got kind of Revanche and Serpentor here as kind of the driving forces against Cobra, and previously we've had the likes of Destro and Zartan kind of playing a role in that as well, rather than necessarily it just being a Cobra versus G.I. Joe. It's just as often all of the baddies against one another, and then G.I. Joe also in that mix.
I was actually really impressed with Serpentor Khan being able to trust again in Revanche, considering he had been betrayed by them in the past, to the point where I would think if I had collaborated with someone and then they had betrayed me, I would be more wary. To me, I think that shows a tremendous amount of optimism on Serpentor Khan's part, that he would, where he hates G.I. Joe so much, I guess, that he would be willing to trust someone else. I don't know. It kind of blew my mind, just that level of why you would put your eggs in that basket again. I don't know.
Yeah, this time they definitely won't double cross us for sure. They said no backsies.
Yeah, but I mean, forgiveness is such a tremendously powerful thing, and the fact that Serpentor Khan could find it within himself to forgive.
So you're admiring Serpentor Khan's capacity for forgiveness.
No, I'm admiring his capacity to believe that everything is going to work out, despite it having never worked out in the past. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I'm way more defeatist than Serpentor Khan. You know what I mean? And I'm working on a way smaller scale.
Imagine, Lisa, if in your past life you had been Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
I think he's an optimist, because I think he did such a good job conquering in a previous I'm saying this.
Yeah,
I'm saying this.
I'm loving it.
That in the grand scheme of things,
he's done it before.
Yeah. But he must have a tremendous sense of accomplishment then. You know what I mean? Where even if in the second life it doesn't work out exactly as planned, I've already had this super satisfying first life. I need to find that in myself.
Yes, Serpentorcon's resurrection. It's all gravy after you're resurrected.
Right. I agree.
I wanted to pick up on two threads that we I don't think have really touched on yet and get some reactions. One is the zombie thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that in the previous issue, there's a moment where there's a panel where some zombies on Cobra Island do eat someone. But I feel like Hama has sort of forgotten that there are all of these zombies in issue 303, and that zombies only have sort of one thing on their mind. And, you know, if you make zombies in your story, you get to make the rules for what, you know, are they fast? Are they slow? You take out their head, they die, how much they want flesh. But all the things that Mindbender and Serpentorcon are saying and doing in this issue, I can imagine them doing if they weren't zombies.
Right. No, I had that same thought too.
The zombie thing is so weird, but I kind of love it, right? Like, when I picked up 301 and the mutagen bomb went off, I was like, oh, what are we doing? And it is so extreme. And I am curious to see, like, does it actually change the course of anything? Right now, it doesn't seem like it is.
Well, I mean, like, they already devalue life. Like, they've been really, like, they've really relied on human beings as, like, just cannon fodder for, like, a long time.
But it also feels like...
I can see, like, going, like, oh, God, I don't have to deal with the inconvenience of all of those. Like, you don't have to make a zombie believe in your cause. You don't have to worry about, okay, yeah, like, thank God they do not have hopes and dreams.
But they've touched
I can just kind
upon,
of point them in a direction.
in the previous two issues,
Mm-hmm.
that it is a zombie thing where they do crave flesh. But
Right.
now we're getting zombies that are like Cthulhu creatures.
Right.
So, like, what exactly is a zombie in this context? I don't think we have full answers.
Well, I think, like, the fact that it's a mute, it wasn't a zombie bomb. It was a mutant
But it did
bomb.
make zombies.
It did make zombies, but, like, the whole point of mutation is that it's, like, constantly changing.
Oh.
So I think that it being a mutant bomb versus a zombie bomb.
What I see in the comic is they all have like rashes and boils on their skin. Some of them have tentacles, and not this issue, but in a previous issue, they do crave human flesh. And I think when they make it to shore, whether it's Florida, because Cobra Island is off the coast of Florida,
Mm-hmm.
or Springfield, and Lisa, the joke is that the clever thing, or the joke is that we actually don't know where Springfield is,
Right.
because in the real, it's like the Simpsons joke, but this predates it. In the real America, there are Springfields in 49 out of 50 states.
How fun.
And so it's like, oh, where do the Simpsons live? Like, they live in Springfield. It's like, oh, where's Cobra's Springfield? It's in the States. And so it's not clear if, you know, they're going from like Florida to like North Carolina or to like Oregon. But when these zombies, both the like retiree citizens who were at the casino and also the Cobra soldiers, make it to America and Springfield, that does change the story. And maybe in Hama's writing of this scene, these scenes in 303 where they're upgrading the Vipers, whether a zombie is hungry for human flesh doesn't need to be addressed, because we did that note in the previous issue. But I do, in this issue, I did think, oh, have we forgotten that they're also zombies? So that's one point. Mark?
Can I chip in? So it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
last issue, you know, Serpentor was kind of unifying that force on Cobra Island with the promise of going to Springfield as a bigger food basket, I guess, because they're stuck on an island at the moment with limited things to kill and eat. So you know, very much a unifying, motivating idea of let's go to Springfield and take over Cobra and use that as a launch pad to eat America. I think that plot point hasn't gone away completely, because I think they still are going to do an invasion of Springfield before too very long. But yeah, I think possibly there's been a little bit of a distraction in terms of all of this Blue Ninja aspect of now the zombies have been made into cyborgs, and less motivated by human flesh and more, and more up to snooping about bases or going on hit squad assassination missions.
So Brad and Lisa, Larry Hama, when he writes a story, he doesn't plan ahead, and he just writes the next page, and he doesn't really know what's going to happen on the final page until he gets there. He has in his career written some stories and plotted some stories. He's like working in the X-Men office on Wolverine, and they would have like yearly meetings, all the writers and the editors, and they'd figure out what would happen in the next year because there'd be a crossover. So I think not literally every page he doesn't know literally what's on the next page, but I think in broad strokes he really does, as he says, make it up as he goes along. So we're reading 303. When he's writing 303, I don't think he knows what the zombies are going to want or need in 304, when they're going to get to America or Springfield in 304 or 305 or 306. If something may change that, like the Joes head to Cobra Island and stop them, I think when he gets to that scene as he's writing it, he figures it out. So I'm willing for some of the sort of rhythm and the pacing of this subplot to feel uneven, because Hama will get around, he won't get around to it, he'll get around to something. And that's how the book has always been. And I think sometimes that's really fun. Sometimes it's frustrating, but it's always interesting. The other thing that jumped out at me in this issue is, and Mark talked about this at the beginning, Snake Eyes talks in this issue. And compared to any other character in a comic book, he doesn't say a lot. But compared to every Snake Eyes appearance ever in this comic, he talks a lot. He says, "Easy, Timber." He says, "I heard it too." And he says, "Scarlett." And he says, "The better to slice upwards through both your bodies." And then he says, "Best to make sure." That's a lot. And I felt like something was missing. And Mark and I talked about this when we finished talking about the previous issue in a previous episode. How is Scarlett going to react to Snake Eyes now talking, now being able to talk? And I go a step further, which is, how might the reader and how might the other Joes react? And I think it's two things. In the juggle of so many characters and vehicles and subplots, and also Hama's writing is not melodramatic. It's not highly emotional. Like, it's not Chris Claremont's Uncanny X-Men. There aren't these like big speeches where, like Scott and Jean like profess their love for each other. This is not Stan Lee's Silver Surfer. It's like Shakespearean tragedy of like, "I've lost my home planet and I am alone, sentinel of the spaceways." Like, things happen, and most of the characters in this book are U.S. military. They are even keel. They get the job done. And sometimes something terrible or amazing happens, and they don't react much and they move on. But this scene, I feel like, okay, twice now recently, Snake Eyes has started to say something, and then he doesn't, and Scarlett's there. And all of a sudden, he's talking in this issue, A, like a regular character, and B, like someone who sort of has always talked. And I felt like, if not in this issue, then really soon, I think I need more of an acknowledgement from some other Joes that Snake Eyes is A, back from the dead, and B, he can talk, because he could never talk before.
So we were under the impression that he could not talk, like he was incapable of talking?
Yeah, he suffered 2 different terrible injuries when he was in war, and also on an early mission sort of at the beginning of G.I. Joe.
But this is a clone of Snake Eyes now.
Yes.
So maybe that same trauma has not happened.
Correct.
So how long ago did the clone come back?
6 issues.
Okay.
So he's fresh.
No, not even that. It
He's
was
a fresh
300 that he...
Well, no,
actually...
three. Okay, he came out of the tank in 300.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
is it not common knowledge? Do the other Joes know that he's a clone? It's common knowledge that he's a clone?
They would now, because some of them were there when he shows up, and some of them were on the radio, and someone's like, "Snake Eyes is here. He's back." So Hama doesn't write a lot of emotionally heavy characters emoting a lot.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't do that. But when Snake Eyes died, his funeral was an entire issue. And so I feel like Hama, for consistency, I don't need a whole issue where the new Snake Eyes goes to the base and every Joe comes around and pats him on the back. And then he and Scarlett go have lunch and she says, I can't believe your voice sounds like it does. I haven't heard you speak, right, in so long. But I need something.
Mm. Does he have the memories of the old Snake Eyes, or is he a completely separate? Is he a completely new person?
Mark?
Yeah, so he had his memories restored via the brainwave scanner, but we don't know exactly what that restore point was. So there may be some gaps in his memory which are as yet undefined.
So I say anybody who shushes Snake Eyes deserves a knock in the mouth. I'm sure, like, to me, like, he has a tremendous amount of stuff to say. I'm sure that from those years that he couldn't speak, there were things he probably wanted to express. Like, to me, like, you can't expect someone who has undergone a trauma and then been reborn to be the same person he was before. You know, like, to me, like, I agree with you. I would love to hear what Scarlett thinks of this, you know? So has she only been, were they together before he was reborn? Yes?
Yes, they were together from before the G.I. Joe team was formed. So, like, in the chronology, pre-1982.
That's astounding.
But to Tim's point, like, this issue reads like they've had many conversations
I'm
already.
Sure that they have. Like, so to me, like, I can't remember who said it.
If she's let him,
right? Yeah. Right? No, that's exactly right. And was it you, Mark, who pointed out that they were sleeping back to back?
Yeah.
And how that can be like a symbol of, like, they're not necessarily they're not necessarily coming at their relationship from the same direction. Like, you know, when somebody can't express themselves all of the time, I'm sure she was projecting a lot of what she thought that Snake Eyes was thinking on him. And I wonder if she feels now disillusioned now that he can express himself more clearly. Ooh, that's fascinating.
Don't you want to do a counseling session on them?
Yes, I do. I tremendously do. Because, like, I'm sure, like, I'm guessing that they were sleeping back to back because they were actually just sleeping, you know? And so, like, it's not like Brad and I, when we sleep, we're always facing the exact same direction.
That is correct. Lisa is a wild sleeper.
I'd be thrashing.
She's
I've
all
got
over
demons.
the mattress. Sometimes she's not on the mattress.
So, like,
so levitating a couple of feet above.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't necessarily, like, read too much into them not facing the same direction, but I imagine that they're in a cabin together. They're extremely isolated. I'm sure that they're talking all of the time, or I hope that they are.
In these 3 issues, every time you see Snake Eyes and Scarlett together, it's like, okay, this is a moment, and we're craving more.
Right.
And we're getting, like, a pleasure delay regarding their relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, but I imagine that Snake Eyes is going under a lot of, like self-deprogramming and going, like, I do have a tremendous amount to say. And anybody who doesn't let him speak,
knock in the mouth.
Knock in the mouth. Knock in the mouth.
A comparison that I often make is G.I. Joe to Uncanny X-Men, this Chris Claremont run, because there are so many interesting parallels, and to some extent the, like, extended Chris Claremont run, you know, like the Scott Lobdell run that comes after it. But, you know, every 20 or 50 issues of X-Men, there's, like, half an issue, there's, like, Christmas or a baseball game, or they go into town and they go to that bar, that bar that always gets destroyed,
right?
And because the
Happy Harry's or something like.
I don't remember, but we can figure it out. But sometimes it's sort of the issue after a big story or a crossover, and it's like a breath or a pause, and you just get some sort of character flavor and some conversation while they, you know, play baseball or, like, have a beer. And G.I. Joe does not do that.
I'm thinking about this panel because I'm looking at one of them where they're in bed together, and Scarlett with the red hair there as well. I'm thinking about like the X-Men relationship with Scott and Jean as well, particularly because you guys have been talking about that so much, and it's like that kind of iconic, established, solid relationship for such an enormous amount of time until it isn't. But you know, Snake Eyes and Scarlett in the comics, they've been a duo pretty much, you know, I'd say on and off, but pretty much on, apart from when he's died. When they had a break for that. It's that kind of iconic relationship where I guess there's an enormous, you know, weight on it.
Was Scarlett with anybody else while he was dead?
I think this is an interesting thing. She had, I think, some complicated feelings. Because while he was dead, they had a replacement Snake Eyes who was a different person, but suffered a similar trauma where he lost the ability to, he had, you know, damaged his face and he lost the ability to speak.
And that's really just her type. Like that's what she likes in a man.
Then he dressed up as Snake Eyes because they wanted to trick Cobra into thinking that Snake Eyes was still alive and G.I. Joe was less vulnerable. And then there was Dawn, which is the kind of female Snake Eyes, and she was this, you know, high school kid who had Snake Eyes' memories downloaded into her. So there was these two Snake Eyes, one of whom was like physically similar to Snake Eyes and had the training and dressed like Snake Eyes, and the other who's a girl who's got all of his memories. Dawn had some funny feelings towards Scarlett because of those memories inside of her brain where she's got all of this, you know, feeling towards Snake Eyes. And Scarlett seemed to have some complicated feelings towards Throwdown Sean because of that kind of physicality.
Oh my God, I would read the hell out of that book. Like, if I knew that that's what was happening in G.I. Joe's, I would have invested way sooner. Then again, like, I am a melodramatic reader. Like, that is what I come to comics for. I'm way more X-Men than I am G.I. Joe. But, like, I don't know. That's fascinating.
But we get, like, one panel of that every few issues, and then the rest of it is chopping up cyborgs. So...
Also, in X-Men and in Avengers, there are other relationships besides sort of the one well-known one, you know, besides Scott and Jean. There's Rogue and Gambit and, you know, Storm and Forge or Storm and Wolverine later on in the Jason Aaron run.
Wolverine and everyone.
Yeah.
Dirty dog.
You know, Hawkeye's been married to like 3 Avengers. In G.I. Joe, you have Snake Eyes and Scarlett, and then, you know, we sort of checked in like 4 or 5 times with Flint and Lady J. Destro and the Baroness are an item. That's about it.
Okay.
So that some characters have romantic lives outside of the book or within the book with other characters, other marquee characters. It is not a big component of G.I. Joe. It is a secondary component. I wanted to ask Mark a question. When the 3 Cobras are sneaking up on the pit in Utah, they identify it as Camp Greer. And I'm trying to remember, does anyone call it Camp Greer before that in the issue? Is this the first time?
Yeah, I think it's sort of surfaced here, there, on occasion. I don't think this is the first.
It is called Camp
time.
Greer in this issue because I have that written down in my notes.
Okay, but I was wondering. So we all call it the pit. The pit is the underground complex that's below this modest. You know, like there's like 1 watchtower and like 3 Quonset huts and maybe a couple other like sheds, and this is what Spirit is guarding. We call it the pit, even though that refers to the thing that's under it. But I thought, wait, Camp Greer? Is that the first time it's been named?
Yeah, I don't think I couldn't tell you with precision when it's been used before, but I don't think it's the first time. But they sort of it clarifies a little bit, I guess, the terminology that Camp Greer is kind of the public-facing name of this is the camp that sits on top. The pit is below.
I spy with my little eye.
I had a couple of spies of little details we've not talked about so far. There's a letter from Mark in London, UK, in the letter page, which I will just for the record state is not me. Outrageously, there is another G.I. Joe fan called Mark, who is in the UK, who has written in, like I did. So I was very disappointed that it was a different Mark and not me in the letter page. But I will keep on trying. I did notice there was this ninja formation where one gets on piggyback on the other so that he can kind of use his shoulders as an elevated shooting position, it looked like. And that just put me in mind of the Scorpion formation from issue 134, where a bunch of red ninjas all climbed up on one another's shoulders to create a kind of giant scorpion, which is, of course, the best way to fight other ninjas. Were there any other little details that you guys had noticed that you wanted to call out?
One of Dawn's parents is a plumber.
True. There's the van. Yeah.
There's a van parked, Marino Plumbing. Also, Dawn's dad has a pistol.
Oh, I did not notice that.
Which it isn't a big deal, but we haven't seen a lot of civilians at home in G.I. Joe comics who are sort of unrelated to the Joes or sort of family members of them. We've seen a couple, and it sort of it jumped out at me because, oh, this guy lives in the Cobra town. And everyone who lives in the Cobra town is either a Cobra soldier living sort of in their civilian clothes and their uniform is in the closet, or they're like a true believer and some kind of, it's like, I moved here. I'm not a militant, but I believe in it. Or they've been brainwashed. But I thought, oh, he's got a gun.
Yeah, and I will fix those terrorists' plumbing.
He says, Dawn says that she knows that her parents had a rough time because of what she did. So could the gun be in relationship to that? Did she endanger her family in some way?
I thought it was sort of more, well, it could either be emotional because she disappeared and became a Joe. It might also be that, Cobra Commander interrogated them because their kid defected.
Yeah, the rubber hoses and the telephone book.
I didn't have any I Spies or error detectives.
It's a Larry Hama colloquialism. He's talking G.I. Joe and all its heroism. Can you guess what it is? Is it something new? Now listen as Larry drops a slice of real life on you.
Did have two colloquialisms to call out. The first one was the Galen 2000 self-contained autonomous surgical bot. Now, class, who can tell me who Galen of Pergamon was?
I think Mark can.
He was a Roman Greek physician, surgeon, and philosopher, considered to be one of the most accomplished of all medical researchers of antiquity, and sometimes called the father of modern medicine. So that's the link to a surgical bot naming convention. My other one of a good $10 word was I'm going to trip over this one. Verisimilitude, which is, great. I would add it to my vocabulary if I could pronounce it properly. And that is the appearance of being true or real. So this is where Alpha 001 says, when questioned about whether the machine can make the Vipers pass for human, they say, you will be amazed by the verisimilitude, creating that altered, lifelike shell.
I did also clock that word because I love the word verisimilitude. And I love it because usually it's being used kind of like metaphorically. But in this case, it's being used very literally. This is going to look like a real person. Very impressive.
Postbox Pit, this is where you can send in your thoughts. Mark and Tim will hear it, and then we'll discuss it. It's really nice to hear from our biggest fans.
Before we wrap up, we had a listener contribution, so let's hear what Scotty Cameron had to say to us, who, funnily enough, does have a letter in this month's issue.
Yo, Joe. Hello, Mark and Tim. Got the double feature today of ARAH and Cobra Commander. Gotta say, I love both comics. We get an alliance forged between Serpentor Khan and Alpha 001. More Snake Eyes speaking. But now, does it look like those Ravon's robots shut him up for good? Also, the letters page. I know Tim's going to be happy, and I'm in the letters page. So are you, Mark. Now you know, and knowing is half the battle.
So thank you, Scotty, for that little voicemail, as always. So before we wrap up, let's give it a score, and specifically, Lisa.
Ooh.
As a brand new reader, with 303 being your first issue in, I'd be interested to see what your appetite is for reading issue 304 and beyond.
So before we had our conversation, I would say that my interest in I would say a 5 out of 10. Like a 5 out of 10. Like I could take or leave continuing to read G.I. Joe, even though I did really enjoy this issue. I enjoyed the art in particular, but I wasn't feeling particularly invested until I found out that Scarlett is now in a relationship with the clone of her dead boyfriend. Like, now I'm in. Now I'm a 10 out of 10. I'm so curious. I would like to read more. But then you said, well, you're going to get this in like 1 or 2 issues, and then that bumped me down to a 7. So now I'm a 7 out of 10 interested in continuing.
Excellent stuff. And I guess as a context for that, you rated Duke very highly. Was that almost a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10?
I'm definitely going to continue reading it. But like they're in this instance, G.I. Joe doesn't exist yet.
Like Duke 1 is like let's start. Let's go.
Right. So his intentions are really clear. Like, there are Transformers. That's terrifying. You know what I mean? Like, so like I understand where he's coming from. Where I just don't understand where any of the people are coming from.
Don't you feel like here's my question to you.
Sure.
Like you were already a big fan of Joshua Williamson and Tom Riley before reading Duke number 1.
Mm-hmm.
And the style of both the writing and the art is very Lisa.
Right.
Whereas the style of A Real American Hero right now is, it's very Larry Hama. It's of an older school.
Right.
And not necessarily your bag.
Yeah, I talk a lot about when it comes to liking or not liking stories. Like, I talk a lot about priorities. And I feel like even though Larry Hama says that he comes from like this deeply character place, I feel like his avoidance of melodrama, it kind of like, and the fact that is his very last priority, like, makes the story maybe not for me.
And this issue, I would say, even compared to the last 2 issues, is very plotty plot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I would feel terrible trying to judge, like clearly I can't judge all of Larry Hama's G.I. Joe based on this one story. That would be completely unfair.
Inappropriate.
Brad, do you want to go next?
I'm loving it. I'm having a great time with G.I. Joe. Is this my favorite issue of the 3 issues we've gotten so far from Skybound? Probably not. I was so excited off of 301, and this is propelling the narrative forward, and I'm curious. And the whole, like, I didn't even know about the clone Snake Eyes thing until you guys said clone Snake Eyes on this podcast. So I have a lot more questions about what has been going on, but that does answer a few that I had based on like, why is Snake Eyes now just so chatty Cathy in this issue? But I had a really good time with this specific chapter. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I'm definitely continuing, and I'm excited to see where it goes and how the whole, Serpentor zombie gang goes.
I'll go up next. I really like the art still. It's got a lot of punch to it. Though with Tim's observations, I am sort of seeing some of the patterns in the repetition of some of the art. I really enjoyed 301, really enjoyed 302. I've spoken before about the sort of the danger of reading comics monthly is that when you've got like a trade paperback or you're going through a stack of issues that have built up over time, if you get a bit of a bum issue or one that you don't enjoy quite as much, it's fine because you just move on to the next one. Whereas when you're reading in real time, you've got a month to kind of wait to see if it goes in a bit more of a direction that you are hoping for, or how things are going to resolve, if certain points are going to be picked up or just abandoned, all of these kind of things. So this was a bit of a transition issue again, and sort of the resurfacing of the Blue Ninjas sort of picked up a plot point that I feel like I kind of had my fill of from the IDW issue. So on that basis, it's an issue that I enjoyed less, but still overall enjoyed. Still very much super looking forward to the next issue and seeing how this does all progress. So probably overall about a 7, I'd say.
Ooh, tied.
I was disappointed by this issue mostly for the storytelling reasons. I also did find it to be more of a transition issue, and some G.I. Joe Larry Hama issues are, the way that he layers his like A plot and B plot and C plot. Some of them stuff is coming to a head, or some of them the A plot and the B plot are like really heating up, and sometimes they sort of all feel more even. Maybe this is what Brad was just saying a moment ago, like plotty plot. And I same with Mark about I'm interested in the Blue Ninjas coming back or being a part of the Skybound run where Hama would do something new with them. I don't see it yet. But the color on this book is still gorgeous. I haven't talked about the color at all in this episode of Talking Joe, and I am still really thrilled by Francesco Segala's work on this, but I give this a 5.
I just thought to myself, imagine if the next issue was an all-silent funeral for Scarlett and Snake Eyes.
Wow.
That would be a hell of a twist. We'll find out when we talk about it on in Talking Joe in a month's time, when we tackle G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero 304, which is on the 21st of February. That's my birthday. When the Skybound era of ARAH continues, we'll also be looking at Cobra Commander deep dive very soon. I'm really looking forward to talking about that with Tim and seeing what he makes of it, because I know what I make of it already.
And for those of you who read G.I. Joe 303 as a physical object in your book, it had the 4-page Cobra Commander 1 preview in the back.
And worth saying, actually, that the Cobra Commander 1 came out the same week as this issue, so we had a difficult decision to make about what to cover first, but our hearts do lie first and foremost with the A Real American Hero storyline that we've been following for the best part of 40 years, and in between we're all sorts of fun interviews looking back on the Devil's Due era will come up. Brad and Lisa, our listeners, go and check them out and seek out the Energon Universe coverage that exists already. There was a magnificent interview with the Duke team where you really pulled out some interesting points from the creative team there, so that's well worth a listen. But do you want to just tell us where people can find you and all of that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, you can find us at comicbookcouplescounseling.com. We're on all the podcast apps. We did have that conversation with Joshua Williamson and Tom Riley about Duke. We've also had Robert Kirkman on talking about Void Rivals, and Daniel Warren Johnson talking about Transformers. We've been covering a lot of the Energon universe. But right now, we're just starting a new counseling session series of episodes. We're doing 4 episodes exploring the relationship between Scott Summers and Emma Frost, #Schema. And I'm very excited to delve into that very complicated romance. And we have an episode with Todd McFarlane coming up here in a couple weeks as well. So please be on the lookout for that. I'm dubbing that Life Lessons with Todd McFarlane, even though he would reject that title. But there's a lot to take from that conversation. We spoke to him for over an hour, and it was an absolute
You spoke
blast.
to him for over an hour?
Yeah. Well, he spoke to us.
We got some words in. They were edgewise.
I'm going to put it out here. We've had 4 conversations now with Todd McFarlane.
Oh, wow.
And the second conversation we had with him was all about his anti-religious views.
Right.
And I feel like that's one of the most unique Todd McFarlane conversations out there. Not to like toot our own horn, but I love tooting my own horn. And I think this conversation, while some of it may be familiar to longtime McFarlane fans, I think there's some new stuff there too. And I'm just excited to get it out into the world.
That's excellent. I think if anyone enjoys talking to Joe and has a wider interest in comics, you know, your podcast is definitely something that would appeal because, like us, you really enjoy getting into the weeds and get not afraid to take a little bit of time to explore and pull apart a page or a panel with some detail.
That's so kind. Thank you.
Your exploration of the Scott and Emma relationship has sort of made for some very interesting listening. Tim, can you remind us where people can find you when you're not talking to me about all things G.I. Joe?
Video essays on TV and film at our YouTube page, Atomic Abe. My brick and mortar comic book store in Somerville, Massachusetts is Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at A Real American Book.
Very good. And if you are new to Talking Joe, just a reminder, you can find us on the usual places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website that has links to all of those places. Facebook, Twitter, I won't say X, Instagram, email, voicemail. We're also over on Patreon, patreon.com/talkingjoe. And you can be one of the cool kids like Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Brian, Shane, and Ryan, who are all getting early access to episodes and some exclusive content. So I think that just remains for us to say thank you so much to Brad and Lisa for joining us, and good to get a new take on this particular issue, and certainly prompted some discussions that I don't think would have arisen otherwise. So great to have you on.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
And that is us done. But until next time, remember that
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters.
Wow, you got pipes. That sounded great. The singing.
Thanks. That's a jingle from the ads from '89. The Nobody Beats G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
a real American hero.
You have a lovely voice. What a lovely singing voice.
Thanks.
Now, I've been recording parody songs to kind of start each episode based on the contents of the issue for the last, I don't know, 10 episodes or so. 10 monthly ones, which have a lot of heart to them, but not necessarily a lot of tune.
They have a lot of character. I found it very sweet.
Thank you.
No one works harder on a G.I. Joe podcast than Mark.
Aw, that's very sweet. I love hearing words of affirmation between partners. That's beautiful.